Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're super excited to have you here. And more importantly, we're really excited to kick off what's going to be an absolutely fun week for you here at re:Invent. Our session today is about building securely on the cloud, leveraging AWS. Now, I know a number of you are going to think about, well, we do that. We have a point of view or a perspective. That's great. We need that perspective. But what we thought would be interesting for you is to get the perspective of some very seasoned executives that have dealt with it in varying degrees, to get their pragmatic view and perspectives, and to learn a little bit about some of the challenges they see. My name is Archana Vemulapalli. I'm responsible for the solutions architecture team here in North America and AWS, and I'm truly privileged and honored to be here. So thank you again for making time. Sincerely appreciate it. And now on to our August panel. I have Casey Santos, the CIO for Asurion, and I have KK, who's the CTO for Delta. With that, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. Now, for the next hour, I have the easy job. I get to ask them all the questions, and they're the ones that have to impress you. So the best way to start off is to just get a little bit of lens about your backgrounds. I genuinely believe that our experiences shape our decisions and how we drive change in our organizations. So maybe, Casey, we'll start off with you, a little bit about your background for the audience and your career journey.
Sure. So I'm the CIO at a company called Asurion. Our job is to help you make the most of your tech, however you use it, and when you use it. So if you have teenage kids, you would know about us because you probably have bought a warranty or claim plan for your phone because they get dropped and things like that. But we also have connected home products. We have a major appliance line where we do major appliance repair. And we have now rebranding a bunch of stores called YouBreak-I-Fix, which are now called Asurion stores. And you'll see those changing, and you can take your devices, everything from Game Boy controllers to, or Game Boy, that ages me. Oops.
Yep. You said it.
You know, what all the kids are using these days. So my career path, I am an engineer by trade. I started my career at NASA working in mission control for the shuttle. Did that for about 5 years, but I also learned I like to code. And so when I started coding, I really enjoyed it and found that I could use it outside of NASA, and ended up doing some consulting and really like to tie together business outcomes with technology and see what you could do. And that premise has played its way through my career. I went back to business school and then ended up working at McKinsey for a number of years, and then was in the finance industry working at hedge funds and private equity funds as the CIO, and most recently relocated to Nashville, where Asurion's headquartered, and I'm so excited to have joined them about 1.5 years ago as the CIO. So that's my career journey.
That's awesome.
In a nutshell.
KK?
Hey, first of all, maybe folks might have noticed that the person who was supposed to be here was supposed to be the CISO for Delta Airlines, Debbie Wheeler. Unfortunately, her plane got turned around because of some engine issues, so she couldn't be here. But no, she's all okay. Everybody's okay on that. Right? But I was having breakfast with Archana this morning, and she said, "Hey, how about coming on to this panel?" I said, "Are you sure?"
But I figured a CTO would always have perspective of how to build securely, correct?
But so I'm CTO at Delta Airlines. Anybody fly Delta here? Hopefully everybody does. And there's a little cheering squad here. So I've been at Delta for the last 4.5 years. Been a fantastic experience. In the middle of it was this little thing called the pandemic, when the bottom fell out of our market. But hey, we are back, and we are having very high occupancy or load factor, as we call it, within our planes, and so that's great. We've had some little issues around, hey, we can't find enough pilots and stuff like that, but we're getting through all of them. So we're still hiring for every one of those roles that are going to make the planes run. Been there about 4.5 years, as I said. In the middle of the pandemic, we decided to bite the bullet and said, hey, if not for now, in the middle of the pandemic, when when only a few thousand people are boarding our planes, this is the right time to get onto the cloud, and hence starts our journey.
Yep.
That's what we've been doing for the last year and a half to two. It's a multi-year journey that we're on, so we're absolutely working with all of our partners here to get that done. And it's been a great ride, so lots of stories to share and all the marks on the back, if you will, right? So now before that, I was the CTO at Dell Digital. Was there at Dell for an EMC Dell really for 9 years. EMC, as you know, this large storage vendor who also owned VMware, who also owned RSA Security, also owned Documentum, and a whole bunch of essentially anything that you put on storage, EMC did a good job of. Dell came along and acquired EMC, and that's how I became part of Dell. So I was the chief architect in the IT area, and then using all of EMC products, just so you know, right? So including the security and all of those products, VMware. And then, as I said, Dell Digital was the CTO there. And then prior to that, I spent about 15 years in financial services myself, and was in Fidelity Investments, was at State Street Corporation, different parts of the life cycle in financial services. So been around the block a little bit. I started my career as a researcher at Bellcore. If you know Bellcore, Bell Labs, the offshoot of Bell Labs. And so did a lot of work on transaction processing, which came from my doctoral work was mostly on actually replicated databases and increasing autonomy and concurrency, which I try to use these days, but my cheering squad here won't let me. But that's my story. So it's been a fun ride. The reason I think Archana thought I cannot hold a candle to what Debbie would say, right? But on the other hand, I can talk about our journey and how we are actually working closely with our security team headed up by Debbie, and how that whole notion of the kind of operating model change. Yes, we are moving applications into the cloud, but we are also significantly changing the way we work and how we're going to adapt various aspects of the operating model, and security is very much part of that. So that's all part of what we will hopefully talk about today.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that hopefully everyone takes away, your experience for both of you has been pretty wide-ranging, right? You've worked in enterprise, you worked in financial sector, you've worked now in a B2C environment where you're actually like direct to consumer impacting how they experience things. But a huge part is how the security teams and sort of the construct of security has also evolved. It would be great to get both of your perspective on what does good look like? How do you define a good security organization? And sort of what are the key metrics, or what are the key indicators that you think that have been the most meaningful or the best way to say, hey, this team's actually operating the right way? Casey, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I'll talk on a couple of areas. One is kind of going through the transformation, because what you measure yourself on changes. This is a journey. So in a previous organization, took them from all on-prem to the cloud, landed at Asurion. We're pretty far down we've been many, many years all in the cloud. And so where we are is in a very different place. For a mature organization, I would say there's a few things that we're always working towards and how we think about it. One is really shifting best practice to being where security is part of your culture, and it's across your entire organization. And this partnership, and it's kind of interesting, we're both more on probably the CIO, CTO side, but our CISO counterparts could easily be here, and they're side by side in everything we do. And at one point I had to wear both hats, which is a really interesting place, because you're getting a lot of pressure to roll stuff out, but you also own what happens if things don't go well or if there's a problem. So I think that partnership is number one, and also that it's not that the security team is here to take care of this. It's embedded in all your organizations. Yep. And so when I measure it, it's like, how are our teams across the organization, our development teams, implementing, how are they thinking about this? And then we have measures that are probably more specific, like how we measure vulnerabilities across the entire stack, and putting risk based measures on those to understand which vulnerabilities you go after first, because you can't boil the ocean. If we all tried to solve every problem, it's a futile exercise. So you pick the things that are the most important and you start whittling away. And as you see those vulnerabilities going down, and you see them by business unit, by development team, by different parts of the infrastructure, that tells you a lot about where you are in your journey. So that's how I think about it. How do you, and then also the flip side of that is the readiness. How ready are you when that thing happens that you have to be able to, and how quickly, how resilient are you that you can come back up? And those are the things I really think about measuring and making sure we're on top of.
Has your perception changed on time to detect and time to respond?
Well, yeah, I mean, my expectations are higher on how fast we detect. The first step is understanding everything you have out there.
Yep.
Which when you get really into the cloud, really far into it, you're starting to use so many services and you're trying to keep everything open so you can keep innovating, right? And that's really the power of it. But there's places where there are black boxes and you don't know how it's all tied together. And so you are constantly learning and figuring out how to track those things. So when 0 days come along and when different things happen, how quickly are you able to know where everything is and to be able to detect it? Otherwise, yeah, you can recover in 5 minutes, but if it's been sitting out there for 3 months, that's a problem, right?
Good point. Kiki?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Casey just said. I think even from the get-go, we made sure that as we were doing this transformation from on-prem to the cloud, we wanted to make sure that, there's a saying of take your mess and put it our mess for less, or whatever it is, right? But the thing is, we wanted to make sure that we don't start to introduce things into the cloud which we already don't know enough of. You talked about the black box. We have a lot of that. I mean, right? We are a very old company. We have applications ranging from, everything sitting on the mainframe, but all the way up to something that's been, generated in the last couple of weeks, even. So there are different archaeological digs of what level of security we have. On-prem, it's one thing, right? So one of the things we said, number one, was we would. And we obviously, by tradition, we have the notion of migrate, containerize, and modernize. Those are the three kinds of broad categories we have been moving our applications on. Now, migrate doesn't mean just lift and shift. It means that you actually do remediate any high and critical vulnerabilities that are there as part of the set of applications. So we do, as part of every move that's done on the migrate side, we do vulnerability scanning, if we have the code, of course. And that's one of the first steps and it is being remediated before we put it up there. And so it's another aspect of remediation on the security side, but also making sure that we get to the N and N-1 versions of the software stack as well, because that's very much where we find a number of areas where there are vulnerabilities too.
Did that take a cultural shift in how we look at perimeter security? Because traditionally, security was all about perimeter.
Yes.
And as you move to the cloud, that changes.
Yeah, we're definitely getting more and more closer to zero trust, right? So this is where we have to say that it's not only the perimeter. Everybody talks about, it's like a cookie or something like that, crunchy on the outside and soft on the inside, and we believe in that, right? So we want to make sure that, number one, as we said, right, we have been looking at things that we are actually moving for some part of, even containerized, we're not changing large parts of the application code. We're doing the vulnerability scans, making sure they're getting remediated as not everything, right?
Yeah.
They are getting remediated as we go in. That's number one. But in addition, we spent a good amount of time building out our whole foundation layer, right? Working with folks from AWS and the other partners that we have. We said, let's make sure that we take our time to build out the foundations and not rush into it. So we had a good amount of effort put into what is the account structures, what are the kinds of IAM kinds of things we have to do about it and all that. We spent a little bit of time around it. So, you look back and say, hey, that seemed to have slowed down the progress.
Yep.
Or, hey, we're doing all this remediation before we move into the cloud. It's not a migrate, lift, and shift. It's part of it is part of the remediation. But I look back at it and say that was the right thing to do. Because in a certain way, right, and everybody knows that there are incredible amount of attacks that are happening day in and day out. In the travel sector, of course, a lot, right? And so we own a refinery too, so there's been attacks on those fronts too. So we want to make sure that anything we put out there is, to the largest extent already, in the right shape possible. Yeah. We know that we cannot prevent everything, but at the same time, let's put it as good as we know. And so that's been part of, and so, while we say we remediate and all of that, We want to make sure that it's embedded, like you said, Casey, right? The secure coding practices have been embedded within our teams for a while, but at the same time, we want to make sure that it's not like somebody stands on a hill and throws it at you. It's more about these teams getting integrated into, as part of our operating model, every developer should be aware of what secure coding practices and how are we making sure. And we were moving slowly, but surely into a model of where you build it, you own it. That's not been necessarily the traditional way of approaching things, right? So we want to make sure that the own it means very much about, one of the things that you raised was, of course, security, but also resilience. How do you make sure that when things are not going great, when you lose a piece of the infrastructure, whether it be AWS or anything else, that you're still able to have either the appropriate mechanisms to be resilient about it, or essentially make sure that you've built in the right kind of support structure within to do that. So these are all parts of where it's part of the overall operating model experience rather than just only security or only resilience or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're having this discussion about security, but any migration to the cloud, any change, it's a change, right? It's a different mindset. There are similarities, but to just try to lift and shift can be fraught with inefficiencies, lack of resilience. So you have to rethink, and you've got to get your culture to rethink in cloud terms, right?
So how do you do that, Casey? So one of the things I think that's pretty clear is speed is important.
Yes.
But when you're trying to move at that speed and you have all these changing variables, as a leader, when you're setting these visions and you're working with the security teams and your own teams, how do you build that culture that drives the willingness to adapt to change quickly and at the pace at which the organization needs it?
Yeah, I mean, so the transformation, like moving to that is hard, right? Because it's new. So I think, and you can talk about what you've done, starting small and getting people educated and getting some wins on the table is important. But I also think that one thing that was very interesting for us is setting up some key services that help drive that culture. So a very wise person once told me, hey, if you're going to make me take medicine, give me a little sugar to help it go down. So when you think about what do we want to do, we want to roll out code as fast as we can. We want to innovate. We want to change the world, right? In order to do that, if you can provide services that help prop that up, but at the same time ensure that you have the right security set up into your instances, that you've got the right monitoring, that you have the right kind of dashboards that tell you how you're spending and what you spun up and by whom, so you can drill down and help coach people not to spend too much and keep their P&L down.
Yeah.
That's the sugar, right? And so that helps drive the culture rather than trying to just drag everybody down and kind of, we're going to govern this. Governance is always fraught with
So on the
heaviness.
governance point, though, let me just pull that thread a bit, because I've heard this across several enterprises. And the fundamental issue they raise with governance is actually the approval process. and it's always about, they don't know who to go to, or they feel like the process changes often. And so that's a huge process issue. Do you see that? Do you think that's actually a problem, or is that more about how you set change management as a structure?
Well, somebody on my team is here. I'm sure they would have opinions. But I think, yes, it's constantly evolving, right? Some of the governance is going to evolve because we find new things and we need to make sure we have stuff going out into the systems the right way. So I think there's a combination of things, right? You set up governance as best you can, and you have to constantly be adapting that. You have to make sure you've communicated and that you've got people embedded throughout all your development organizations. We have things called security mavens that are people that are embedded in our product team, in our supply chain, in our call center technology teams, that are in addition to our security teams and our infrastructure teams that are well-versed in what needs to be done. And then you monitor, right? So inevitably you're gonna miss something, right? You'll start rolling stuff out and this one came out and didn't have the thing that was supposed to be on there. And you go back and clean up as you go along. So I think in order to keep moving fast, you have to have a little bit of flexibility in there.
Yep.
At least that's what we've found works, because we move very fast for the scale that we are.
I would say that it's very much along the lines of what you just said, Casey. In addition, what we've done a lot of is It goes back to the partnership between all of these teams. So the security team is, as I'm saying, it's a great partner with the sets of application modernization teams, let's say, right? So in that sense, what they've also been doing is making sure, yes, the governance process is a necessary process.
Yep.
GRC, that's what we do as part of our, how do you actually move these things into the cloud, right? So, but as part of that, it used to be a manual process, and we used to get all, into each other's and step on each other's toes all the time. The security team themselves went ahead and said that, hey, we see a few patterns, let's automate these.
Yep.
As part of the actual, it's not a form creation process, but yeah, there are aspects of it which can be automated, pre-filled, as an example, or even from an overall, you just run the actual, report that comes out of, let's say, one of those code scanning tools, and sort of feed that into this automation vehicle, and it says that, okay, yeah, it's good to go. So those are the kinds of things that the security team has actually innovated on to help us get ahead of this. Because obviously, if you start to go down a process where you're trying to get to the cloud, but hey, there are all these process steps and manual steps along the way.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not out of the woods yet, but it's a huge amount of work that both the infrastructure team as well as the security team have done jointly that enables us to get that speed.
So you bring up a good point, right, KK, and it's leading into my next set of questions is how do you, both of you, envision, and where have you seen it work best, the relationship between your product teams and your security teams? I had a couple of security engineers tell me they have a point of view on this, and when I talk to my product teams, in my past life, they always would tell me that we hate the gates you create. We can live with the guardrails. And so it's always an interesting notion about how people want to move, and then sort of the mandates both organizations have. How have you in your role sort of brought that together? What kind of best practices do you have for the audience, or just perspective you'd like to share, or observations even?
Sure. So I think a couple things, like I said, that provide the sugar, right? So automating as much as you can so people can spin things up without having to fill out forms in triplicate, right? It's like the TPS forms or TPS reports. Making sure you don't have to do those, right?
I haven't heard that reference in a while.
Yeah, have you seen the Walmart commercial? They've got one. The TPS report, I love Office Space. It's a staple for everybody. But I think we have to make sure that we make things easy for folks, right? Very important. Second is that we make sure that you talked about ownership, right? When things don't go right, I mean, if you think about when we had breaches back in the old days, when the first breaches happened for different companies and it made such headlines, right? And then people started getting more serious about it. So once you've had events or incidents or things that are scares, and people own what they put out there, they start to get a little more excited or more accepting. So I think making sure education is a really important part, and that this is a team effort. It's not just like the security team playing whack-a-mole and the product team is over here just throwing stuff up, right? These are teams that are working together to solve these problems. So I think there's an accountability factor that helps make it a little easier. Those are some of the things we've done. And like we said, the Maven program was an important one too, because they have kind of a dotted line to the security and our infrastructure team. So we have actually a three-legged piece, right? Our technology infrastructure team is kind of governing and helping with the cost and the management of the tools, and then the security team's monitoring the security piece, and with us, and then the product team's developing, right? So I think the important thing is making sure you have people that have dotted line responsibility, and they celebrate when they have wins, right? We have actually a thing where if our product team finds something, a vulnerability and fixes it, we celebrate that at the senior levels to make sure that people understand how important it is to the org. So those are some of the things we've done to make people feel that they're part of it.
I think along the same lines, one of the things that I talked about is that we are making sure that our product teams are also educated and upskilled or reskilled, whatever it is. And that we said across the board that cloud is new to us. So let's make sure that security is one of those components, right? But that cloud education that we're getting working with our partners again is across the board. And to the extent that everybody gets upskilled and trained, it's a good thing. And security is one aspect of it. So it's been both ways as well, right? Because I think it's as we said, it's a partnership. So what the security team has also been doing is saying that, okay, we will have squads that will explicitly help people get over some of these issues that are there. Meaning, hey, I got to remediate this. How do I actually go about doing it? What are the top 10 OWASP kinds of things which we have to guard against? So that's sort of getting to the stage of getting that security inbuilt versus the bolt-on kind of thing, right? So and that's been very fundamental to it. So as part of our overall education process, that's what we've been doing. And so there's a notion of a cloud journey partner. And that is every squad that's getting named, because we are undergoing massive transformation, right? Including the way we're going more and more from a project-based organization and the way that is set up to a more product-based organization. And so we are on the journey towards building these sort of smaller two-pizza teams, and that's the squad. And so, we've actually gone ahead and broader, right? I just want to sort of put the strategy out there. Broader said that, okay, there is no notion of a centralized QA organization that sits outside of all of these product teams. Let's break that up, embed it within these teams. Architecture, again, let's line up the people who are going to be doing the architecture as solution architects within these teams.
You mean the crew right here?
Some of the folks here. And break it up and have them work directly with the product teams, as an example. So as an extension of that, and so, the whole notion of a messaging, or the same way. So what the CISO organization has done for the overall program is, here is a couple of squads from the security team, which will actually enable some of this drive towards that. But the intent, of course, is to say that this will start to get embedded within. So there's a transition kind of state where we're saying that, okay, there's a helping and enabling kind of a model, but soon it'll start to get embedded within these teams. And so who's the security champion within each of these teams? And so those people are actually being named, and that's the start of the process. And so it has to be a partnership, right? Because it cannot be that, hey, the governance process is more of, I look at it as participatory governance, right? Where, yes, we will help you with all the tools that you need. These are physical, actual tools that will help you do the actual scanning and remediation as appropriate, but also that we will provide the education and the upskilling necessary to make sure that each team can be self-sufficient. And that's sort of the journey we've been on.
We call that like shifting left, right? You want to shift as far left as you can, get it to the early parts of your development process and design process so that you're not cleaning up later. The sooner you get it, So our CISO coined that. I'm not going to take credit for that, but.
Both your CISOs are going to appreciate all the call-outs on the stage. Now, here's we talked about leadership. We talked about change management and sort of the role that plays. But one of the looming issues has been talent and having the workforce that you need to go drive some of these big outcomes that you're aiming. How have you sort of tackled the workforce requirements and the security talent requirements? And what maybe tips or ideas or things that have worked for you that maybe you'd like to share?
Yeah, so for us, we've, because we got involved fairly early, we built a lot of talent internal with the help of our partners, the training programs and the different things, but we've built a lot of the skills internal. And then as leaders grow, they're bringing in young talent and building more and more of it. We do encourage cross-functional as you get further in your career, if you can move over and work in product for a little bit or security. So we have some leaders that have done that. But it has been a struggle. I think it's getting how do I put this? It's not getting easier because the demand's higher, right? Everyone's going to the cloud, so now we need more people. But there are more people out there that are well versed in it. So I think our big thing is building talent, helping create some really great career paths, and that's something we're constantly trying to improve. Like, how do we show you where you can go next and what's going to come? And then also making sure that you're getting all the training and skills and conferences and whatever you need to support growing those skills has been something we've been doing. And the final thing I will say about recruiting and that is it's not like you can just throw up a job description on LinkedIn and everyone and their brother is going to sign up for that one job. So there's a lot of networking, a lot of relationship building as we go out and recruit and trying to build relationships over the long term. So.
Yeah, talent is one of the most challenging areas that we have tried to tackle as well, of course. And one of the things that did happen during the pandemic, right, was that the one thing that stood out for us was that maybe Delta did not have any single employee exit involuntarily. So I mean, the culture is so strong. Yes, of course, we had to release a number of contract resources, but it was a matter of sustenance and just being able to survive. But not one single employee was let go. And so there's an aspect of we've enjoyed very low attrition rates through the years, which is sort of both feeds on itself, right, in terms of what it is. And so that's something that we point to, saying that the culture is so strong, it's easy to find people who have been there for 40 years, 35 years, 20 years, those kinds of things, right? So it's a starting point, saying the Delta culture is very strong. And here we are trying to move to the cloud. Hey, it's exciting. It's, we're doing the necessary work to actually provide the training necessary to get you to the cloud. That's on another side. One of the things that we have tried hard is also, as you also realize, Delta is a very people-facing organization, in the sense that there are large parts of the organization that don't even have the luxury of being remote. With all the remote stuff that happened in the last couple of years, your pilot is on the plane, so right now, and so are your flight attendants.
Thank you for that.
Exactly. So now, while IT was able to be remote for most part, that's another. We have to show solidarity for the rest of the organization, right? So what we actually have is a hybrid structured work model where we say that you can't be remote all the time, but you have to sort of be in the office for 5 out of 10 days, meaning every couple of weeks spend 5 days, right? Yep. 3 days here, 2 days there, that kind of. So we've been introducing more of a structured hybrid model so that it sort of is a sort of halfway point between all of that. But we've had lots of people turn us down, in spite of the culture, in spite of all of this exciting stuff that we're talking about, because they wanted full remote. Maybe some of those people will come back now, I don't know, right? But that's part of the challenge just overall, right? And we're trying to move to the cloud. Now, the security area, Debbie would say, is an even more challenging area because there's been a lot of attrition, and we've tried to sort of look at overall market rates and do something about it, but it's still very, very challenging. So which means that what we have to rely on is folks like AWS and your partners to say, who is available to come and help us? How can we start to have more talent acquisition models, right? Where we say, hey, we have an apprenticeship program, bring people in and have them train with our people. Because even as part of our journey, the whole notion of training is what we like to think of as 10, 20, and 70. Yep. Right? 10 is, okay, classroom training. 20 is much more about community or shoulder surfing the other person. But 70 is really on-the-job training. And so while we provide all of this training, we have to have some notion of apprenticeship and doing that. So those are different models that we've tried. But hey, we are all competing for the same resources, right? Especially when we talk about cloud and security, right? So it's been challenging. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I took away from what both of you said, and I think that's an important one, is we tend to always look external for talent, but there is a lot of value in also looking internally for talent, for people that understand our environments well enough so that they can then be groomed in to build up while we also go seek out external strong talent in this space. So I think there's a complementary aspect to what you both said. But equally, I think what you both implied, and it kind of tees off into some of the questions I want to build on, is you can't have, I mean, for the amount of people you want, there are not enough people out there. And so you have to then really look at automation as a core strategy on how you drive outcomes in the business and a way in which you drive more efficiency and accuracy and start to balance the scale that you have. So I'd love to just get your perspective, both of you, on how you've leveraged automation as a strategy. How has automation across the security landscape helped you as you started along this path?
Yeah, I mean, so
We're sticking with this theme.
Yeah, it seems, yeah.
you want to go first this time?
I could.
Yeah, why don't you go?
Automation, of course, I started to talk about it, has been very key to even some of the acceleration that we've achieved over the last couple of quarters, right? So we clearly there is a whole set of tools that we are leveraging while going from on-prem to the cloud and to the cloud, that is the inherent automation in adopting those tools. So that's one aspect of it. I'm not necessarily talking about that. We have pipelines because part of our journey to a new operating model is to say that, hey, we have the build pipelines. We are adopting very, very diligently the whole notion of DevOps ranging from CI/CD all the way, right? So those pipelines are in there. That's where we do much of the vulnerability checks and making sure that we can do the code remediation and all that. But in addition, we also see that our own security team is incorporating development staff within, right? And what is that for? It's more from a perspective of let's look at the patterns, let's create the kinds of things that will enable this whole move. So I'd like to say we are lucky because, hey, we started a little bit late in terms of getting to the cloud, but hey, we have these opportunities to actually look at what others yourselves have done and say there are aspects that we can start to adopt right away. And so, and part of it is, as I said, right, even the GRC process is automated significantly now. And so anything that's, unless it's egregious, it's something that shows up and you have to put a lot of effort into it. It's starting to get more and more where you can crank the wheel and actually solve these issues. And so that aspect of automation is very clear. But the larger, overall security and, making sure that we have a SIEM, we have the right kinds of desktop security, all of those, everything is getting more and more automated from a larger perspective. So I do feel that we've been taking the right steps on those fronts.
Awesome.
Yeah, so ditto on a lot of those things around CI/CD and automation of different processes. I'd say this, automation is something I get really excited about because I think that technology is that really unique place in between all the different lines and functions in your business where you can see processes that cut across an entire organization, and you can use technology to make that better. Security is one piece of the puzzle, and I look at this as a way of saying, I need my very best people working on really high-level problems and really important work around developing new capabilities, et cetera. What are the things that are manual that just create a lot of friction in the business? And how do we automate those pieces? And those are a combination of tools that help us, spin off servers or build, do different builds or make sure we've incorporated the right things. But it can be things like typing down the asset name and like just dealing with asset management or something, and it happens throughout the organization. So we're looking at automation opportunities across the entire organization so we can say all that low-level copying and pasting and things that people have to do, let's smooth that out so we can, and it's also a great retention thing because nobody wants to copy and paste things, right? So you've got really talented engineers, let's let them work on the stuff that is differentiating them. So we're doing that, we're looking at opportunities and saying, okay, which have the best bang for the buck, let's start with those. And so that enables us to spend more time on the security pieces.
One of the things I'll add to that, if you don't mind, is let me give a plug for this thing we call the CCOE, the Cloud Center of Expertise. And that is an organization that provides a lot of the thought leadership on what we should be automating more and more, right? So they are actually looking at it and saying, okay, here are opportunities, and they have squads. The CCOE has squads which are actually building some of these tools and incorporating them into our overall life cycle. So, and that's a very important element because, we have this set of folks who are both looking at what needs to be done, but not just saying that here is the pedantic way of saying it, and here's the theory.
Yep.
They actually have squads who are building what needs to be done and working closely with the infrastructure teams on their automation. We don't obviously allow people to have admin rights, right? So how do you make sure that in that kind of a scenario that people are able to get their job done, look at logs, and do all of that, right? So that's an example of where these kinds of automation are very much needed. But in addition, so with infrastructure, with the security team, so CCOE forms one aspect which brings it all together, if you will. So so there you go.
No, I think you both raise a good point. There's a lot of automation available, and I think our approach at AWS has been, and I think a lot of people in this room would agree, is we've been automating as much as we can. We don't believe a large security workforce necessarily is the sign of a highly functional security workforce. It could be, but we tend to believe that a lot of these can be automated. A lot of the process communications have to be consistent. So I think what you're saying is really resonating, but what I'm taking away from the conversation is also the change aspect of moving folks to think differently. The CCOE construct, as an example, is a structure you have in place to get people to start to think and operate in that direction. Now, you've sort of touched on it, Casey, when you said, hey, I look at areas that cause most friction, and those are the areas we focus on automation. Have you collectively, in either of your scopes, started to see from a security lens where security process automation or key aspects, whether we call it IAM policy or it's threat detection, have you seen that value be tangible as a difference from the way it used to be done to now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I can give some examples of some automation we've done as far as our patching or our keeping track of different things. We do track vulnerabilities quite comprehensively across the organization, across the all levels of the stack. And so when we automate different things, those vulnerabilities just collapse, right? Because you don't, one automation can, if you're doing it at scale, can wipe out a lot of vulnerabilities. And so we see like the level of our critical and our high level vulnerabilities when we automate something has reduced incredibly. And then our maintenance costs have gone down too, right? Because we're not having to go out to 1,000 servers and do XYZ process. The other thing that we've done, I think, is the importance of data, right? So we have a really comprehensive dashboard that tells us how our teams are using the cloud, and we can drill down and see where there's inefficiencies in the process, either from a security or from a costs perspective, and we can use that to hone in on the things that matter and automate. Yeah.
I'd say the same thing. Obviously, at one point, maybe we thought...
You can disagree sometimes, too. It's allowed.
As I said earlier, right, we just, we don't have pride of ownership. We just imitate and, just do what other people do. No, but I just think that a whole aspect of where any of, looking at security, as we even started saying in the beginning, right, hey, it's seen maybe as something that slows people down. I actually think that it's a great thing to actually speed the whole process up because you're more confident about what you're putting into the cloud. Yeah. So with some of the aspects of how the overall, let's say orchestration between all of these parts of processes, there are many tools that we use in our environment. We have something for container security. We have something for, each element of the stack has different kinds of security. We have a seam in the end, which, loads up all the logs. But the more that we can actually get towards what you would call, the signal versus the noise is more and more important. And so that's where any of these cannot be done without automating more and more of what's there in the stack. And so I would say that absolutely helps, helps us sleep at night, right?
and to build off that, KK, one of the key aspects when we, as an organization, especially an IT organization, we're frequently always asked on, what is the ROI? What is its investment? What are the costs going into an organization? And frequently, when we talk about security and the security investments, when positioned the right way, can also be a huge enabler in an organization. So has that narrative sort of picked up in Delta and in Asurion when you talk about, your availability or your ability to, when you talk about cost per incident? And are those looked at in a structured way?
I think they're starting to get more looked at. Sorry, I jumped.
No, go ahead.
She's like, I'm
getting ready to disagree with you.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. They are being looked at, right? So the main thing is that, If there are aspects of an incident, typically more, the incidents are related to, hey, some parts of infrastructure having issues or some applications having issues here and there. The more and more that we can rule out the aspects of, hey, this is a security issue which is causing this, or a DDoS attack which is causing this, and in different ways, I think that we are able to say that, okay, this is a cost that we are avoiding for the future. The issue is cost avoidance is always not an easy thing to work with, right? So, and a lot of what we do, whether in the security area or resilience area, is, hey, the road not taken, the other road would have been a really bad road, right? So if you look at what we would consider as potential, exposure, I think that starts to get very, very big.
Yep.
It's not even something that you can go to the board with and say, hey, see what we avoided. And so that's really not the case, right? So what I say is, the more that we are doing earlier on in the life cycle, like you said, the shift left, and making sure we are assuring ourselves of something more stable, more secure in the future is how we are looking at it. And it's a cost avoidance kind of a scenario. I don't know how you look at it. Please disagree if you want.
Yeah, I vehemently disagree. No,
Well,
just
we look like a really happy panel otherwise. So
yeah.
it's
No,
okay
I
to
mean,
have
here's what I
some
would say.
different
I
points of view.
think we need to do a better job of tying what we're doing to business outcomes as organizations. There's still a lot of confusion about security and what it does and how it affects. When you start talking at the C-levels, they get a little bit, either they're panicked or scared of things, right? Like, because it's this black box. Security is this mysterious thing. And I think we can step up to more of the 30,000 foot level and say, okay, here are some scenarios, right? Where if this goes wrong, here's the business risk. Here's what would take to remediate it. Are you willing to take that business risk? Is this investment? Is there an ROI on that investment? I think if we think more like that, I think we're going to have better outcomes in the end. We're still early in our journeys in that. There's still a lot of education still, I think, across the organizations at the senior leadership levels. And then we're really down in the depths, right? We're shifting left, but we're down at the developer levels and tying, getting the two to meet somewhere in the middle to communicate is still difficult. I think we could do better.
All right, I'm going to switch gears to procurement now.
To what?
Procurement.
Procurement. I didn't.
So a huge part of exposures now are increasingly partner dependencies and product dependencies that you deploy in your environment that you don't build on your own. And there's been a lot of discussion lately on the role procurement plays in de-risking and working closely with both the product teams as well as the security teams to go drive the right measures. How has that matured, or do you think it's still early stages in each of your organizations?
So, so I actually, in full disclosure, own the procurement function for our organization too. So it's a good question. I still think there is a lot of, hey, are these clauses in the legal contract? Did you capture the privacy clause and which are very important things to include? I think the due diligence questionnaires are getting better and better, but there's third-party risk and then there's fourth-party risk, which I think is an area that we all could dig in more in.
Yep.
Whether it sits in, and I've heard this debate, does it sit with the procurement team? Do you have the right skills in the procurement team to really go in and dig in and have those conversations with your key partners? That's debate. But it is something I think that organizations are going to have to get much smarter about, and as they get they see vulnerabilities and things happen, I think they're starting to get more involved in that. And I think you start with the most critical vendors that have the biggest critical infrastructure for you. And the other piece I see to that addition is that if you have a lot of infrastructure and you don't know how it's all tied together, getting those partners to work, and we've seen this with some partners, are getting more are working much harder to explain all the different services and how they tie together. So if something goes down, it could affect this over here. I think those are great conversations that are starting to happen because as we put more and more into the cloud, things will break, right? And we're going to have to understand how to bring them back or how to engineer against those risks.
Yeah, procurement does play an important role in the process that we go through for any due diligence, of course, but I don't know that it's completely integrated. I mean, we enjoy the partnership with procurement quite a bit, and obviously each of us from a technology applications perspective or from a security perspective are all deeply involved with any decision. But further integration is something that maybe we talk about, but it's yet to come for us, right? So, and procurement does not sit within my organization or the larger CIO organization. It is more in the finance setup, but that's aspect of where we do enjoy the relationship we have with procurement because they form a very important function overall. So
yeah, and everything has to go through procurement. So at least you've got that. There's not some partner popping up in the middle of nowhere that didn't go through procurement. So that's helpful.
All right. We've talked a fair amount about leadership, about change management, automation. We even talked about procurement. But one of the things I want to sort of, as we start to get towards the end of our session, just get your lens on the security landscape and what trends have you seen either change or stay consistent in the recent years?
So what I would say is, again, we're kind of just watching our journeys. We used to have to build everything from the very beginning. And what I'm really excited about is the platforms and the services are maturing, so you don't have to build every little thing. There's so many great products coming out from our partners. AWS, big part of that. That you can come in a little later or you can replace a lot of bespoke tools, which I think is going to actually free up a lot of energy to be, continually innovate and move faster. With that, though, there's so much complexity in the cloud. And so I think putting more effort, I think we're going to start to see people need to put more effort into understanding all those moving pieces and what happens when, different parts of your infrastructure, especially if you're distributing across different clouds and functions, how that all ties together is going to be really critical, and how you secure it, right? How do you bring all the APIs together in a really secure way, and making sure there's no gaps in those processes. I think all that's getting easier because there's more and more tools, but I think we're inventing more new stuff and putting more and more into it, so the risk just keeps getting higher. So I think it's a constantly evolving dynamic environment, which is really exciting. And there's more tools to work with, which is wonderful, but our job's not done.
And are you seeing also, Casey, especially in your industry, more of supply chain risk because with the number of incidents?
Yes. I mean, if your systems go down and you can't, or if your partner's systems go down, there's cogs in the wheel, and supply chain is so tight right now that yes, it can be a big risk factor, right? So again, back to those partnerships and understanding your supply chain. Again, procurement starts to be a really important piece of that, of understanding all the critical points in your supply chain and how well those are secured. It is adding to the risk for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
I wish I could say I disagree with everything you said. But yeah, the cloud is complex. The security with the cloud is complex. Now what has also been happening is with each service, let's say sets of services that you start to leverage in the cloud, each sometimes needs its own treatment of security too, right? We can sort of say the perimeter security in a certain way and sort of build it into the cloud, the equivalent of perimeter security, what I was going to say, but every layer of the stack starts to get its own, security angle to it. And so it's become more complex. I can definitely see that. The notion of having the partnerships to make sure that you can actually link all of this pieces of security up, because clearly, by themselves they can be fantastic, but the overall, you talk about supply chain, value chain, the whole notion of where are the gaps in between all of these products, and are we absolutely guaranteed that there's not going to be some little hole that somebody creeps through?
Yep.
I don't know that I'm completely convinced of that, but I think we try to leverage what we know and build more into what we think the miscreants could be doing as we go forward. But I don't know that it's getting any simpler, right? But we just sort of, as I said, make sure that we can go down the path of what people have already done, and in the full context of we've actually seen the kinds of attacks go even 10 times. Right? Given we are in the travel industry, but hey, there are aspects of ransomware and sort of just a notion of being very out in the news kind of aspects of it. And so we just seen this attacks go up, which means that how do we make sure that we protect against those is increasingly difficult. And so the more tools that we can use from a security perspective to do that is good. But I can't say that it's gotten any more simpler, right? So
now, there's also, I think, a wider acceptance in mainstream from people about attacks. So with that level of, before when you had security incidents happen, it got a lot of attention and it got a lot of backlash, and now there's sort of a wider acceptance. But given that kind of acceptance that people are dealing with, are you seeing a change in the urgency at which you have to drive it, or are you seeing a different level of how you're operating?
I think we are operating at a different level already, right? Because I don't know that we would have actually paid so much attention to security. Yes, we are in transition going from in our on-prem kind of a model to the cloud, and we're saying that we want to make sure it's far more secure than what we have. And we know that the cloud brings the tool set to make us far more secure from a foundations perspective, but we are paying a lot more attention to saying that we do the right things up front to go in there. And so to the extent that I think that we are paying a lot more attention, we'll continue to pay a lot more attention to it. And it's a given for us, right? So we don't, we have a notion of, if we actually know from an overall perspective as an airline, safety and security is number one. Now, safety and security is a broad set of terms, but it includes this aspect of security as well. And not only physical security and making sure that the right kinds of people are on your aircraft, right? So this is very much an aspect of it as well. Yeah.
All right. Listen, I want to thank you both. I think this was an extremely insightful panel, because what you highlighted is some of the common mainstream challenges that all of us run into depending on where our organizations are. But equally, I think there were some really good insights on key aspects of what's worked for you and how you've leveraged constructs like CCOA or using Mavens to go drive conversations and the support in your organization. I think the automation theme was very clear and loud, as well as building workforce and looking at some of the workforce internally and trying to groom that and grow that and shape that to meet your requirements. So I hope the audience got as much out of it as I did. I just want to sincerely thank you again for your partnership as well as your presence here on stage. For our audience, a big thank you. You've been absolutely awesome. We appreciate you being here. Please do fill out a survey at the end of it on your way out, and have a wonderful rest of reInvent. And thank you, and hopefully we'll see you in the hallway. Thanks, everyone.